Greetings, and thanks for joining us again for another biweekly update. My name is Carlos Salinas, and I'm the Regional Director for the U.S. Soybean Export Council in the Americas. A pleasure to be here with you. This presentation is designed for key customers like you and for USEC's internal purposes. We appreciate your feedback so we can continually improve this presentation. Before we get started, and as we always do, we like to recognize USEC's wide and diverse membership. Within that membership, we have soybean processors, soybean exporters, seed companies, equipment manufacturers, railroads, surveyors, commodity brokers, among many other important stakeholders and funding sources. And we cannot ignore the support and contribution that we receive from the U.S. soybean farmer. Without that support, this presentation would not be possible. So today we're going to talk about weather. We'll talk briefly about weekly export inspections. We'll dive into some of the emails going around in the market these days, and then we'll touch on soybean meal quality. As you will know, we're entering a key planting window in the U.S. We're on the very early stages. But certainly, there's a lot of things going on, a lot of concerns going with our farmers, obviously weather being one of them, which is going to impact soil moisture, temperatures, planting dates. Clearly, our farmers are also watching and concerned about market conditions, equipment readiness, among many other variables that go around their operations. So let's go ahead and touch a little bit on weather. And I want to share with you some of the recent pictures from the U.S. Drought Monitor dated April 18, 2023. And when you take a look at this map, you can see that we have some areas of concern. I think it looks kind of similar to what it did last year. I would say the big difference, and I'm not a meteorologist, but the big difference is that on the very west in California, Arizona, Nevada, we no longer have that severe or excessive drought. They have received a lot of precipitation in that area. That doesn't mean that things will improve, but I'm hopeful that those conditions do provide some help and moisture as we begin our planting and growing season here in the U.S. I like this map because this is a good contrast of the drought area versus the major crop area and minor crop area in the U.S. And according to this map, approximately 20% of the soybean production is within or experiencing some sort of drought. And you can see the areas that are of concern, obviously, when you have this contrast. We have parts of Iowa, Nebraska, I would even say parts of Minnesota, and even South Dakota, and we cannot forget about Kansas, obviously. But I don't think it's that different compared to last year. And at the same time, I would venture to say that we are very early on the planting stages. But it is good to, as a farmer and as a consumer, it is good to begin to monitor this a bit closer because as you will know, we have a very tight carryout in the U.S. this year, and we certainly need that production. When we take a look at the 6 to 10 day temperature outlook, I think there's some anomalies, nothing to be concerned about. It's going to be below average temps in a lot of parts of the U.S., and it looks like we might even hit my former hometown of St. Louis as well in this border between that dark blue and the lighter blue. From a precipitation outlook, I think most of the country looks normal. Nothing to be concerned about. So again, something to continually monitor as we enter that planting season and growing season in the U.S. You know, a lot of talk about soybean prices and competition of the U.S. And when you take a look at weekly export inspections, the chart I'm about to show you is a seasonal chart. And it will give you the range of high and low in a gray area over the past 20 years for weekly export inspections. And there is a dotted white line in the middle, which is actually the average. And the thick orange line is actually 2023 weekly export inspections. And when you take a look at this map and you see that orange line, we've been hovering around the average. There's been no significant anomalies. Yeah, we are entering the window where the U.S. slows down its export program. It's a seasonal program, and South America begins to take a larger share of the market. But it is nothing unusual. It is actually anticipated and expected by many in the industry. There's been a lot of talk in the market, a lot of emails regarding flows of South American soybeans to the U.S. I think the market had, I would say, quite a bit of a reaction to that among other factors, obviously. And I guess what I want to share with you is the news that I saw. Brazil set to ship 79,000 metric tons of soybeans to the U.S., which I found interesting, but I didn't find surprising. And the reason for that is that I'm going to share with you some of the data that we have from Oil World, sharing what the imports of soybeans have been to the U.S. over time. And our friends in Oil World, and I apologize, I didn't put my source here. But, in the U.S. has typically imported soybeans. In 2017, we imported 667,000 metric tons. 2021, we imported 569,000 metric tons. So, 78,000 tons is really not that big of a deal. I think this year, unlike others, when you take a look at some of the people that have shipped to the U.S., Argentina, well, I doubt Argentina is going to ship any soybeans to the U.S. this year. Because obviously they have a significant drought condition over there. I doubt Russia or the Ukraine will also ship soybeans. Brazil certainly can. It can ship more soybeans. And when you do this calculation, you have to consider capacity constraints of how much you can actually take by port. Again, we have a structure where we are actually exporters, so turning that around is not that easy. And the calculation generally works for the operations which are close to the ports or close to the facilities. It is very difficult, or a lot more challenging to get inland. So I don't see it as a major threat. I think the flow that we've seen is very normal, I would say as expected. As a matter of fact, I would take a look at the following. The U.S. imports soybean meal as well. We import between, I would say, 325,000 metric tons in 2017. I apologize, I don't show the year here, but all the way up to 650,000 metric tons. I think soybean meal imports this year are likely to be very low and very challenging to import because of the situation that's happening in Argentina as the largest soybean meal and soybean oil exporter in the world. They really don't have much supply, and that supply will likely be taken by Southeast Asia. So I doubt Argentina will ship any meal to the U.S. They're certainly not in a position to do so. And the other thing to keep in mind is, India and Argentina compete to a certain extent in the Southeast Asian market, and I doubt India is going to be shipping 235,000 tons of meal to the U.S. They're going to need it either domestically or to fulfill some of the Southeast Asian market because Argentina will not be there. So many things, many variables to consider. But I guess my main takeaway is that this is not an anomaly. This is actually within the norm. I'm surprised how the market reacted to it, but again, there's a lot of people with positions in markets and so forth trying to make noise, and okay, it is what it is. Let's talk about soybean meal quality and digestibility. I was recently in an aquaculture event put together by the World Aquaculture Society here in Panama City, Panama, and one of the experts was talking about soybean meal digestibility, and when I thought about digestibility in the context of today's price environment, it is really critical to make sure that people buy the right product and with the right digestibility, so the animal can actually benefit from that raw material. Proteins are very expensive, and if you buy a product that has very limited digestibility or low digestibility in relative terms, you're throwing money away. And I think many of the experts will agree with that. Now, there are many tools and many indicators to measure digestibility. I want to share only one indicator with you, and I want to preface is that you have to take a look at digestibility as our experts tell us, not as a standalone indicator, but along other indicators to really get a better read, right? But for the purposes of time, I will only share with you one indicator, and this indicator is KOH. KOH is commonly used as one of those indicators to measure digestibility. Many experts believe that the range is between 78% and 84%, the range, the acceptable range. I would say, so I've heard even from 75 to 85 from some feed manufacturers. And if you get below that, there is obviously concerns that the product has been over-processed, or that the raw material has a lot of damage, or maybe a lot of heat damage as well. So you have to keep your eyes open to the raw material coming in or feeding those crushers. In this particular case, we take a look at Brazil, we take a look at the US, we have the data month by month. You see the yellow versus the blue being the US, yellow being Brazil. And we have over 1,500 samples of Brazil, and we have over 2,000 samples from the US. So this data is a data that we receive from Evonik, which is very valuable, I would say very consistent. Now, what we have here is we have the KOH in January 2023 from Brazil, 78.10 versus the US 78.20. The median looks, they're very close to each other, no major difference. But I think I do want to highlight with you the digestibility, because digestibility is important when you match it with standard deviation. If you look at the US, standard deviation here is much lower than the standard deviation for Brazil. Not only that, the standard deviation is very consistent from one month to the other. It doesn't really vary much. So, which speaks highly of the uniformity on the quality of US soybean meal. When you take a look at Brazil and you look at the standard deviation on KOH, you can see how variable, and some years or some months is very high, some months is very low. Still that standard deviation is significantly higher than the US from all perspectives. So the question is, if this is an indicator of digestibility, and digestibility being very important on an expensive raw material, what does it really mean for us? And when you take a look at Brazil, the average KOH number of 78.10, and you take one standard deviation, we're talking about 7.82 in this particular case. And, keep in mind that one standard deviation covers about 68% of these samples taken. That means that you got about 32% or close to that is outside that range, right? Which again raises a lot of flags on the high side and on the low side, which it should probably be monitored. So one standard deviation range is 70.28 and 85.92. And while this is a very wide range, you certainly have to monitor that other 32% of the data, which is above that and below that. When you take a look at the US, in this particular case, as KOH of 78.70 with a standard deviation of 3.06, we are much more in line within those acceptable levels of that range of 76.64 and 81.76. Noting that obviously, if you go to a second standard deviation, you see a different type of of data, but nonetheless within much for sure. When we take a look at March 2023, that would be the most recent data. It's also very interesting. Obviously, in this particular case, Brazil, the number in Brazil is actually kind of low, 75.20. Ask your nutritionist, what that would imply and what other indicators to look at. But in the US, we have a 78.10, not different than before. So we are within, I would say, relatively normal levels. Again, the standard deviation for Brazil is 4.54 and for the US 3.54. What does that mean? That means, again, 75.20, one standard deviation. The range for that 68% of the data that you have is 70.66 and 79.74, meaning that 32% of the data or the meal that you might have here is actually outside that range. And in the US, a bit more under control, 78.10, one standard deviation, 3.54. Your one standard deviation range is 74.56 and 81.64, probably very reasonable and not overly concerning. So again, this is just one indicator of many indicators, so you should not, you should watch it. And if there's red flags, certainly look at it. But I think this data gives you a very good clarity, at least on the data, the uniformity of U.S. soybean meal in relative terms to Brazilian soybean meal when we look at KOH, which is very important. I hope the information shared here with you was of value. I certainly appreciate your feedback, and I wish you a great week, and I look forward to speaking to you in a couple of weeks. All the best. Take care.